Amos chapter number 6. We have been looking at woes of 4 different folks that Amos is giving. From the end of chapter 5 to the ignorant, to the indifferent, and we finish up those thoughts for the indifferent, and we'll finish those thoughts of the indifferent, and we go to that third group there. Find that third group there. The indulgent. There we go. So we finish our thoughts here on the indulgent. We left off with the thoughts that many churches today and many churches in America have kind of turned a blind eye and have tolerated sin when we should stand and oppose it. And there's an illustration here that we'll start with to be able to kind of illustrate this point. The great preacher of the past, Dr. Vance Havner, told of having dinner in an expensive restaurant with some friends and discovering that the dining room was dimly lit. You ever been to a restaurant like that? A dining room is dimly lit, so you can't read the prices on the menu and walk out? Been to some places like that. And the dining room there was dimly lit. At first, he could scarcely read the menu, but then he found he could see it fairly well. He said to his friend, "Isn't it strange how easy it is to become accustomed to the dark?" That's what churches have done here in America when it comes to sin. We have grown accustomed to sin. One of the problems in the church today is we have gotten accustomed to the darkness. And our light isn't shining bright enough. And our light might be not shining bright enough is because our lens is dirty. You know, those big lighthouses there by the seashore, they're up there all the time, cleaning the lens of the glass of that light so that light can shine so those ships can see it. Christians have let their lenses get dirty with the sin in their own life. We have to clean them. We have to pray and ask the Lord to clean them so that our light can shine before men and that men will be able to see our good works and glorify our Father which is in heaven. Since these wealthy exploiters of the poor considered themselves to be first in the land or best in the land, God said that they would be the first to go into captivity. There in verse 7 of Amos chapter 6. Therefore now shall they say, "Go captive with the first that go captive, and the banquet of them that stretch themselves shall be removed. And the Lord God hath sworn by himself, saith the Lord, the God of hosts, I abhor the excellency of Jacob. I hate his palaces. Therefore will I deliver up the city with all that is therein. And it shall come to pass, if there remain 10 men in one house, that they shall die. And a man's uncle shall take him up, and he that burneth him, to bring out the bones to bring out the bones out of the house, and shall say unto him that is by the sides of the house, Is there yet any with thee? And he shall say, No. Then shall he say, Hold thy tongue, for we may not make mention of the name of the Lord. And for behold, the Lord commandeth, and he will smite the great house with breaches, and the little house with clefts. And we'll stop there, as we'll be getting into our next topic here in just a minute. God had said that those who were the rich and had exploited the poor, they would go into captivity first, because theirs was the greatest responsibility that the Lord had given them. Certainly King Jeroboam and his priest Azariah and the political and religious leaders of Israel would go first. In the next chapter of Amos, chapter 7, beginning there in verse 10. Amos chapter 7 and verse 10. Then Amaziah the priest of Bethel sent to Jeroboam the king of Israel, saying, Amos hath conspired against thee in the midst of the house of Israel. The land is not able to bear all his words. For thus Amos saith, Jeroboam shall die by the sword, and Israel shall surely be led away captive out of their own land. Also Amaziah said unto Amos, O thou seer, go, flee thee away into the land of Judah, and there eat bread, and prophesy there. But prophesy not again any more at Bethel, for it is the king's chapel, and it is the king's court. Then answered Amos and said to Amaziah, I was no prophet, neither was I a prophet's son, but I was an herdman and a gatherer of sycamore fruit. And the Lord took me as I followed the flock, and the Lord said unto me, Go, prophesy unto my people Israel. Now therefore hear thou the word of the Lord. Thou sayest, Prophesy not against Israel, and drop not thy word against the house of Isaac. Therefore thus saith the Lord, Thy wife shall be an harlot in the city, and thy sons and thy daughters shall fall by the sword, and thy land shall be divided by line, and thou shalt die in a polluted land, and Israel shall surely go into captivity forth of his land. Their self-indulgent followers eventually had to exchange their lounges for chains, and their wine for an expensive food, for the meager fare of prisoners, when they would be led away captive by the Assyrians, who would remove them from their land that God had promised them, because they were disobedient to God. The final woe that I mentioned here in verses 8 through the end of the chapter, there in Amos chapter 6, is the last woe goes to the impudent. As we read there in verse number 8, shall not the land tremble for this? Oh, let me get back to where I need to be. There we go. The Lord God hath sworn by himself, saith the Lord God of hosts, I abhor the excellency of Jacob, and hate his palaces. Therefore will I deliver up the city with all that is therein. See, the Lord not only said this, but he also swore by himself to fulfill it. He says there, the Lord God hath sworn by himself. God made a promise to himself. And of course, God does not break his promises. You remember the covenant that God made with Abraham. In Genesis chapter 15, when God had told Abraham to take a certain number of animals and divide them lengthwise to be able to help make that covenant with God, God put a deep sleep upon Abraham. And then he walked through the midst of the sacrifices that were there to make that covenant, that blood covenant with Abraham. But while Abraham was there, he was asleep. God basically made a covenant with himself to bless Abraham. And he did. He blessed Abraham with the promised son Isaac. Isaac was blessed with Jacob. Jacob was blessed with 12 sons that became the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. God made a vow here to himself as well, and he would fulfill it. It makes this statement here in verse 8 a most solemn statement. That word excellency there in the phrase, the excellency of Jacob there in verse 8, basically means pride. It is used by the psalmist in Psalm 47 in verse 4 to mean the promised land, the land that God had promised them. But you'll notice at this time in the history of the nation of Israel, God abhorred the very land of Israel. God hated the land itself that he had promised to the nation of Israel because it had become corrupted by his people. Jesus says, Jesus said in the New Testament in the Gospel of Luke chapter 16 and verse number 15. Luke chapter 16 and verse 15. He was speaking to Pharisees who were a covetous people. And they derided him on the verses that he said there before. And he said unto them, Ye are they which justify yourselves before men, but God knoweth your hearts. For that which is highly esteemed among men is abomination in the sight of God. We remember that the northern kingdom of Israel, they had boasted of their fortresses, and they had boasted of their mansions, and they had boasted of their elegant way of life, all of which God abhorred and would one day destroy. We're reminded of the destruction of the great Babylonian world system that is described for us by the Apostle John in Revelation 17 and 18, when God will destroy the world, the system of the world. And then he will come with his saints in Revelation chapter 19, and then he will set up his 1,000-year reign and his millennial kingdom here upon the earth. When Satan's world system is destroyed. See, even his world system won't last forever. Thank God for that. People who live without God, whose God is really personal pleasure, will one day hear what the Lord told the farmer in his parable there in the Gospel of Luke chapter 12 and verse number 20. The parable begins in verse 16, where a certain rich man had brought forth plentifully, and his farm, and he had a bumper crop, basically, and he had no room to store it. So he came up with a plan. Well, I'm going to tear down these barns, and I'm going to build bigger barns. And I'm going to take my ease. I'm going to retire. Because on this bumper crop, it's going to carry me through the rest of my days. And then in verse number 20, as he said to his soul, to eat, drink, and be merry. But God said unto him, Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided? The Lord told this rich farmer, you're going to die tonight. So where's your stuff going to be? I've heard example of family businesses that were built up by a mother and father. And then they retire or die and they give it to their children. And their children run it into the ground. And they close their doors. Because the children couldn't manage the business, or they didn't want to manage the business. And just ran it into the ground. The nation of Israel, their God was really their personal pleasure. Their God was themselves. And the Lord is telling Israel through the prophet Amos, the Assyrians are coming and they're going to destroy you. Then what will your luxury be? What will your opulence be? It will be in ruin and in ashes. These impudent people who rejected God's warnings would one day face 3 terrible judgments. And the first one is mentioned in verses 9 and 10 there in Amos chapter 6, that of death. Amos describes there a hypothetical situation in these 2 verses to emphasize the terrors that will come when the Assyrians come and invade the capital of Samaria. It mentions there in verse number 9, and it shall come to pass, if there remain 10 men in one house, that they shall die. The 10 men mentioned there, perhaps a remnant of 100 soldiers, is mentioned back in Amos chapter 5 and verse number 3. Amos 5 and verse 3, For thus saith the Lord God, the city that went out by 1,000 shall leave 100, and that which went forth by 100 shall leave 10 to the house of Israel. And these 10 men would be hiding in a house, but disease and pestilence would catch up with them, and they would die. If a relative came, an uncle that's mentioned there in verse number 10, to be able to burn the bodies, because it's the safest thing to do during war when you have disease, not to spread the disease, to burn the bodies. Anyone in the house guarding the bodies would deny that there were any others there who also might die in the plague. But the disposal of these dead bodies wouldn't be a religious occasion. They wouldn't have memorial services. It would be kind of like a mass grave. Because the people would be afraid to even mention the name of the Lord, lest he become angry and send more judgment. but they would see death. For many would die, and the Assyrians would come to invade. And they would suffer that. And we will continue on next time. Two other things that are mentioned there of the terrible judgments of the Lord that would be suffered by the northern kingdom of Israel.